Out of all the ideas that Five Nights at Freddy's has introduced in its games throughout the years, my personal favorite has always been the concept of Fredbear's Family Diner, an older restaurant/location that we never got to play in for ourselves. The idea was introduced in Five Nights at Freddy's 2 when the phone guy refers to it by name.
We're going to try to contact the original restaurant owner. I think the name of the place was Fredbear's Family Diner or something like that.
And since then, we've learned a decent bit from subsequent games about what this older location would have been like. And it's captured the imagination of thousands who have attempted to recreate it using their own fan-made games. And today I want to talk about one of those fan games. It's a game that did so much right and had so much passion poured into it, but ultimately missed the bar with a mere handful of poor design choices that soured the experience. In this video, I'm going to talk about why the return to Bloody Nights was almost perfect. Our story begins in 2018 with the release of a demo for a different game, Bloody Nights at Freddy's by Kazovsky. This game, which never really managed to get off the ground, was essentially an early version of the return to Bloody Nights. After going through a name change and the expected developer hell that tends to happen with these things, the game was, unsurprisingly, cancelled. It would get a director's cut re-release in 2021, which included developer commentary and concept art. This director's cut was the final send-off that Bloody Nights at Freddy's received before being fully abandoned. Around that time, though, Kazovsky started a brand new project with a brand new team, and this project was the return to Bloody Nights. After months of teasers that implied massive improvements all across the board over his previous game, the initial demo released in late 2021 to relative success. If you're curious, the main differences in the demo for the game relative to the full release were different environments, a scrapped girl character in place of the phone guy, and an overall lack of polish, and that's basically it. In an ideal world, the full game would have followed the release of this demo pretty quickly, but unfortunately things didn't quite go as planned. At one point, they lost their lead programmer and were left without anyone on their team who even knew ClickTeam Fusion. But thankfully things would eventually work out. And by eventually, I mean the game didn't release until March 26th of 2023, which meant 2 years in development. However, now that we've finally gotten to its release, we can begin to talk about the game itself. The game begins with a short cutscene, which seems to be from the perspective of someone in one of the mascot's suits watching a performance from backstage. The heavy breathing implies to us that someone is definitely inside of the suit, but before we can really learn anything else about it, the scene just ends, and we get to the title screen. And I have to start off by giving massive props to the design and direction of the game's visuals. The quality can be seen even just on the title screen, and it doesn't end there. The designs of all of the models in this game are fantastic. Basically everything in this game from an artistic perspective is a solid 9.5 out of 10. When we finally start the first night, which is part of the game's story mode, we're greeted by a cutscene displaying a phone, and we get to hear a conversation between Henry Emily and William Afton. In the actual Five Nights at Freddy's games, these are two of, if not the most important characters to the story, and these phone calls, which are gonna happen at the beginning of almost every night, serve to characterize them in much deeper ways than we would generally find in official FNAF media. This is something that I greatly appreciate about this game, as it serves to give Five Nights at Freddy's a more explicit approach to its narrative, which is certainly a breath of fresh air compared to how it normally is like. The voice acting as well is pretty good, and the dialogue isn't written half bad either. It mainly consists of Henry pleading with William to make sure he doesn't ignore safety concerns or rush the process of getting a new location up and running, to which William agrees, that there should be no safety risks. William even admits to being jealous of Henry's success despite them clearly being close friends, which actually lines up pretty well with the way William is presented in canon FNAF media. The only thing I don't really like about these sections throughout the game is how blunt and on the nose the foreshadowing in the dialogue actually is. Henry basically reiterates the same exact point about safety probably a dozen times, and there wasn't really a need for that in my opinion. It's pretty clear that this and future phone calls between Henry and William are building up towards the bite of 83, so there wasn't any need to be this repetitive. But aside from that minor nitpick, I've got no complaints. So let's move on to the gameplay. Once the night finally begins, we see the office, and similar to FNAF 1, the office has 2 doors, but it also has a room behind you and a camera system up front. And the doors run on a generator heat system, which means the power is technically unlimited, but using the doors too much will cause the generator to overheat, and then they won't work anymore. In theory, I really like this mechanic, but I will have some issues with it later on in the video. In FNAF 1, and honestly in most FNAF games, most of the cameras in the camera system are generally pretty useless and only serve as a feature designed to feed into the player's panic when they don't know where an animatronic is. This was a fundamentally flawed idea, which was unfortunately carried over into this game. The cameras don't even take away from your power now because there is no power, so the panic factor that added is gone entirely. Another strange detail that you can notice pretty quickly when you start playing the game is the fact that you have to flick your mouse in a direction in order to switch what you're looking at. This actually works pretty well in the sense that it isolates these environments, being the left and right doors, into separate spaces where events and scares can happen independently of the rest of the room, but the controls in this game are kinda jank, and it makes the idea kind of just fall a little flat. Overall, it just feels a bit unresponsive, which can result in accidental misinputs and overall frustration. And this becomes an issue later on when the game gets much harder. Shortly after the night begins, we hear a recording left behind by a Waffle Brogy, the CEO of Fazbear Entertainment. He's essentially going to act as the phone guy for this game.
Hello there, I'm Waffle Brogy, the CEO of Fazbear Entertainment, and welcome to Fredbear's Family Diner, the job of your dreams.
It's pretty clear that his character is written to be one massive reference to Cave Johnson from Portal, and there's even some instances in which the dialogue will quote from him directly. But this is nothing but a win in my book, as Portal 2 is one of my favorite games of all time. As far as Night 1 dialogues go, it's pretty standard. They always serve as the game's tutorial. This one's no exception. Since the rest of the night offers pretty little in terms of actual gameplay activity, I thought it might be nice to go ahead and explore some Easter eggs that the office has to offer. Obviously, we've got stuff like the animatronic bobbleheads, the sticky note referencing Portal once again, William's certificate on the wall, and stuff like that. However, the 2 most important things to note are the missing children's posters up in the office, as well as the paper stuck in the printer, which is a direct mirror to the articles we can occasionally see on the wall in FNAF 1. There's also a number pad that actually grants you access to some additional secrets if you input the right codes, but I'll briefly talk about that towards the end of the video. Now, something that I don't really like about this game, and it's going to continue being a problem, is that on the first night, it is actually pretty unlikely that animatronics even end up making it to your door. They do wander, which gives the player the opportunity to familiarize themselves with the rooms, but you realize pretty quickly that these other rooms don't even matter. On rare occasion, one of the endoskeletons sitting in the side rooms past the door can randomly stand up and they'll kill you if you don't close the door fast enough. And at no point throughout the game is this ever explained as something that can even happen to you. And this is a mere premonition of what's to come in terms of some of the design choices within the gameplay. Before long, though, the night ends with hardly anything at all having happened. And after it ends, you get a brief cutscene that shows the player waving a paranormal detection device or something like that over the Fredbear animatronic. And this tells us that not only has the missing children's incident occurred, but paranormal activity is also already suspected. As far as I know, we don't actually know who we're playing as in this scene. It could be the night guard that we're playing as, or it could be someone else entirely. I'm not 100% sure. Night 2 begins with another exchange between Henry and William, and it's more reiteration of the safety concerns, but this time Henry gives us a bit of insight as to why he would be reminding William about safety concerns in the first place. Apparently, fellow employees have said that William's quote-unquote work methods could lead to problems. These same employees are also concerned that William's recent divorce could cloud his judgment. I find it very interesting that Henry is the one voicing these concerns to William. To me, it almost implies that William may have a bit of a temper, and if anyone he deemed inferior to him were to bring these points up with him directly, he may get irrationally angry or lash out. The reason why this doesn't apply to Henry is because William sees Henry as someone superior to him, which is implied with his admission of jealousy in the previous call and will be further implied later on in the game. Rather coldly, though, William rejects the premise of the points made against him, saying that he has everything under control and that his personal life has nothing to do with his work. Henry offers support despite the reassuring answer, but William denies it anyways. On this night, Waffle leaves behind a message for the player once again, and this time he describes how they've just acquired the first Springlock suits, and explains to the player how they work. He also talks about an incident where an employee had to go to the hospital due to a malfunction of these suits, so that's always nice. He also informs the player of a separate animatronic designed by Henry Emily himself, which was acting so strange that they had to store it in the office. This is the first hint towards what the room behind us could be for, and of course, it's for the puppet. I've yet to actually talk about the way that any of the characters in this game behave, but that's because so far, the two that we have to deal with are really quite simple. Fredbear and Spring Bonnie will both approach the office from the left and right sides respectively, and all you have to do to get them to go away is close the doors when they appear. Similar to Night 1, there is a relatively low amount of activity, and it isn't likely that anything will get to the door until the later half of the night. From my own personal experience though, I do have to mention that the way that the characters are designed to physically move in front of the spot where your flashlight is shining down the door genuinely terrified me the first time that I played the game. I think it's a super cool evolution of the animatronics just kind of appearing at the door in FNAF 1, especially since having the whole screen dedicated to just looking at the door, which is a thing that I mentioned earlier, just makes it feel more up close and personal. Unfortunately though, now we've gotten to the point of the game where I can express some of my more major criticisms. For anyone that has ever held discussions regarding this game and its quality, you probably already know exactly what I'm going to say. The difficulty curve in this game kind of just sucks. Like, I understand that the point of the Return to Bloody Nights is to act as a love letter to Five Nights at Freddy's 1, but I don't necessarily think that needed to have us spend so much of the game's playtime doing almost nothing when the gameplay is so simple and reminiscent of games we're already familiar with. I think it would have been a much better idea to dive into harder gameplay sooner and have a better difficulty curve. If you're unfamiliar with the Return to Bloody Nights, you might think that my criticisms here are a little bit harsh, and honestly I would normally agree, but bear with me for a little while. Like before, once the night ends, we get another cutscene, and this time we are searching Spring Bonnie for paranormal activity instead, but with no luck. Night 3 opens with a conversation between Henry and William once again, this time with Henry discussing that the employees were concerned that the new Spring animatronics had designs that were too scary to be child-friendly. William assured him that it was just a prototype and that the final product should be much better. He even mentions that he's been studying child psychology, which is a bit concerning, knowing what we know, but whatever. Henry ends the call by telling William to make sure he leaves time for himself and his family as well, since both him and Henry agree that their children are the most important things in their lives. Waffle's recording offers some pretty interesting insight on this night as he asks the player if they're willing to voice some training tapes for the Springlock suits for an extra $20. And that tells us something very important, because it means we're actually playing as the phone guy from the official FNAF games. This detail doesn't actually change much. I just really appreciate how much the Return to Bloody Nights cares about establishing interesting and actually cool connections to canon FNAF lore. It's one of my favorite things about this game. On the contrary, one of my least favorite things about this game starts making itself known on this night, because this night sees the introduction of 3 new characters all at the same time. Technically 4 if you count the cupcake that doesn't really do anything, but anyways. Fredbear 2.0 starts in the far room to your left and slowly makes his way towards your door. You can hear him approaching because his voice box, which is basically constantly making noise, will get louder as he gets closer to the door. I actually am completely fine with this character and his mechanic. I think it's pretty cool, but Spring Bonnie 2.0 is a bit of an issue. He's essentially this game's version of Foxy, and he'll kind of play peekaboo with you, and finally he'll attempt to breach the office, and he knocks on the door if it's closed when he gets there, and then he actually waits a brief period of time before leaving the door after knocking, which is the opposite of how every other character in the game works. The puppet is pretty self-explanatory. You just kind of look behind you and shine your light on their head and they'll go back into their box. For some reason, the developers gave the puppet a really goofy jump scare that kind of just like, I'm sure someone watching this video probably loves it. I would also like to touch on the lack of instruction regarding these new animatronics, although I think it could definitely be argued that limiting the information you give the player does a good job at adding to the horror factor of the game. I still think that mitigating deaths caused by unfairness should be always prioritized when you're designing a game like this. The puppet and Fredbear 2.0 are pretty intuitive, and they require a lot of consecutive mistakes in order to receive actual punishment from them. However, with Spring Bonnie 2.0 in particular, I really wish that he had some sort of instruction beforehand. His mechanics are very particular, and I feel like it'd be pretty easy to randomly die and not immediately have any idea what you did wrong. Anyways, that's enough criticisms for now. After completing the night, this time we search the new Spring Bonnie 2.0 suit. Since we know that the missing children incident has already occurred and these Springlock suits are pretty much brand new, the suit has definitely already been used by William, and quite recently. However, since there's nothing to be found inside except an endoskeleton now, nothing is detected. The phone call between Henry and William on night 4 has a pretty noticeable increase in tension between the two. Henry once again tries to confirm that William is taking all the necessary safety precautions, and William aggressively states, "I don't need anyone telling me how to run my business," and that the employees who think otherwise can find work elsewhere. Henry asks William if he has tried to talk with his ex-wife about the fact that Michael and Evan have a very strained relationship, but he says that it isn't even worth the effort. To end the call, Henry expresses that he's worried about William and that he hopes that the success of the restaurant will make him happy. And this is a truly gut-wrenching thing to have to say to someone so hyper-fixated on their work and only their work alone, especially a close friend that you can see is actively tearing themselves down, and all William does is brush it off. Waffle's recording on this night almost infuriates me with how tone deaf it is. He talks about accidentally forgetting to tell the player about the 2 new Springlock animatronics, but jokingly says that the player seemed to have the situation under control, so no harm was done. The dialogue is literally written to make a joke out of the player's potential frustration being brought at the expense of poor game design. That is actually crazy to me. Even now, the only mention of the actual mechanics behind these two is a passing reference to the hide-and-seek functionality that Spring Bonnie 2.0 has. The second half of the recording is a lot more interesting, as Waffle's assistant Karen, which is undoubtedly a reference to Carolyn from Portal, delivers some documents that inform Waffle that all Fazbear locations are being threatened with closure due to the ongoing investigation regarding one of its founders. By this point, the narrative is progressing pretty steadily towards a climax. Finally, he ends his recording by actually explaining how Fredbear 2.0's mechanics work in detail, although this explanation is literally an entire day too late. If you manage to beat Night 4, this time the cutscene shows us searching Fredbear 2.0 for paranormal activity. For the first time, something is actually detected in this animatronic, but this suit is brand new. This night's phone call consists of Henry expressing his condolences, as the player's shift this time around takes place the night after the bite of 83. William gets angry with Henry's pity attempts, saying that he couldn't possibly understand what he was going through with his perfect family. This is pretty ironic considering he only has a daughter. Definitely not perfect, but sure. Henry tells William not to do anything rash as it won't solve anything, to which William says that he's not looking for solutions, he's looking for revenge. A confused Henry tries to get the meaning of this from William, but the phone call ends. This time around, Waffle is pretty upfront with the player about the ongoing investigations and missing children. He says that now 6 children are missing, but then he says that one of the missing children belongs to a founder and that they've been missing for almost a month. This kind of confuses me because we've been told pretty recently that Elizabeth goes to work with William, so she's alive. We know Michael is alive. Evan just got bit, but he didn't go missing. And Charlotte was also recently mentioned in a phone call as being alive. So I'm not gonna criticize it because I feel like I might just be missing something. The rest of Night 5 is difficult, not gonna lie, but I can mostly excuse the difficulty curve at this point because FNAF games are supposed to be difficult by Night 5. That's just kind of how it works, so I don't really dislike it anymore. It's no longer about being scared of the animatronics or the environment, it's more about the fear of messing up and having to restart. Once the night finally ends, we get a cutscene with expository dialogue from William that takes place years after the events that took place at Fredbear's. He talks about how he's done many unforgivable things since then, and how his animatronics were always meant to be more than just entertainers. I think that the way that this game interprets the order of key events from actual FNAF media is pretty interesting, because in this interpretation, we have a William Afton that did not turn into a murderer due to the events that transpired around him. He was already a remorseless killer from the start. He also even admits to killing Henry's daughter and having framed Henry for the missing children incident, but only because he believes it would have been a waste of his time to go to prison, because he has something new that he's been working on.
I have built a new place for my new creations. A place that will instill wonder and fear into the heart of all who bear witness. And soon, I will reveal what is coming next.
After this, the credits roll, but of course, we know that's not the end of the game, not at all. Although this is technically the conclusion to the game's story mode, obviously like almost any other FNAF game, it doesn't actually end at 5 nights. There's a 6th being offered as an extra challenge, and in this game, it's labeled as Payday. Unlike the previous nights, of course, the sixth night does not open with a phone call between William and Henry, as they'd not really have any reason to be speaking to each other at this point. We dive straight into the gameplay, and we get one more recorded message left behind by Wathel. He comes bearing unfortunate news. Another Springlock incident occurred in a different pizzeria, and they decided to just scrap the costumes altogether because their PR is already in absolute ruin after everything that's happened. To fully tie in the narrative with FNAF 3, Wathel tells the player, the phone guy, to meet him in the morning to record some new tapes, and how he'll also be waiting to give him his paycheck. One thing that I do think is actually pretty cool about this night is that starting around 4 AM, the tape recorder starts playing on its own, with the night 1 and 3 recordings playing over top of each other. This dissonant audio is obviously very distracting and adds to the stress of the already very difficult night, and it continues until the night ends. There's also some creepy rare voice lines that can occasionally play throughout the night, but I unfortunately didn't manage to get a recording of it, so you're just gonna have to take my word for it. Once the night ends and the challenge is finally conquered, we get a new ending. We fade in on a picture of Charlotte, and she has a few things to say to the player. There was someone that night. I called for help, but no one came for me. Now I feel different. I can't disappear, not now. I found others who are just like me. They need my help. I must save them. I must guide them. I will give them their happiest day. And that, my friends, is the true ending of the Return to Bloody Nights. We now have this final screen with a newspaper and a memo from Fazbear Entertainment, written to a Scott Cawthon. How incredibly fitting. I also think it's genuinely hilarious and very fitting that the promised $110 paycheck is actually $99 and some Fredbear's coupons. That's such a Fazbear Entertainment thing to do. The newspaper in the corner, which highlights Henry's framing for the missing children's incident and William's insanely despicable levels of manipulation, even uses the infamous hoax that shows a real-life picture of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza as the photo for the article. Truly, the raw passion and attention to detail in this game's writing and overall presentation is nothing short of astonishing. There are a few other things left in the game, like the secret minigames and the 2 extra secret endings, one of which depicts the Springlocks killing William and the other depicting Springtrap being found. The art and voice acting are really good here, but it's pretty much the same stuff we've already seen, and I'd rather you guys experience them for yourself. I do appreciate the extras menu in this game as well. It lets you see the environments in full detail, as well as before and after comparisons on what the old versions of some of the graphics looked like. And at this point, I've pretty much run out of stuff to talk about with this game. My overall consensus is that everything in the art and writing department is fantastic, but the gameplay is kinda just meh, I guess. Obviously, not everyone is going to have an issue with the gameplay like I do, and if you disagree with me, that's totally fine. But this actually isn't the end for the Return to Bloody Nights. There is a light at the end of the tunnel. About half a year ago, it was announced that the Return to Bloody Nights would be receiving a VR remaster. Now, I didn't even know about that before researching for this video, and overall we have a pretty limited amount of information regarding this project. It seems like, based on what we do know, the game is promising some VR exclusive features and upgrades to most aspects of the game across the board. It's entirely possible that the VR remaster could end up fixing every problem that I have with the game, and improving what it was already good at too. Despite my criticisms of the Return to Bloody Nights, it is important to remember that the title of the video does say almost perfect. I personally believe it to still be one of the best FNAF fan games ever made, and it's only held back by a bunch of minor issues that unfortunately compounded into a few major flaws that I felt were worth talking about. But either way, I still give the game a pretty high level of praise, and the game's future is looking bright. I look forward to the day where I can call the Return to Bloody Nights just perfect. And now we've reached the end of the video. I'd like to thank the developers of the Return to Bloody Nights for the awesome game, and of course I'll be linking it in the description because despite everything I said, obviously it's still definitely worth playing. I had a lot of fun putting together this video, and I'd like to hear any thoughts or other criticisms you guys might have on the game. If you enjoyed the video, make sure you hit the subscribe button or Freddy is actually gonna be at your bedside at 3 AM. No, I'm just kidding. Anyways, that's gonna be all from me. I hope you enjoyed the video. Until next time.